The wind that night sounded like someone whispering my name. I remember the shiver that ran down my spine when my mother's voice cracked from the porch. "Clara, don't dig there." The ground beneath the old oak had always felt wrong. A patch of earth, too soft, too quiet, as if it remembered things better left buried. I told myself it was just roots, maybe a broken pipe. But something about her panic made my hands tremble on the shovel. The moonlight caught her pale face, eyes hollow with something deeper than fear. She kept saying, "Please," over and over, until her voice became a ghost itself. But I'd already started. The dirt came away easy, damp and dark, releasing a smell like rust and rain. Then the metal edge struck something soft, something wrapped. I froze, heart hammering as her scream broke the night in half. By the time the police arrived, the backyard no longer felt like ours. Red and blue lights bled through the fog, flashing across the oak like veins of guilt. My mother sat wrapped in a blanket on the porch steps, her hands still shaking even though she said nothing. I stood apart, watching men in gloves and masks comb the dirt where I'd been digging just hours before. Each shovel of earth they turned seemed to uncover another silence between us. I tried to meet her eyes to ask what she'd been so afraid of, but she looked past me, toward the tree, toward something that wasn't supposed to be remembered. A voice on the radio mentioned remains, and my stomach clenched. The wind carried the faint sound of a siren's echo fading into the dark woods. My mother began to whisper prayers I hadn't heard since I was a child. Detective Harris Cole was calm in the way only someone used to death could be. He asked me questions I barely heard, how deep I dug, what I found, whether my mother had ever mentioned this spot before. His voice was steady, patient, yet every word felt like a shovel digging into our lives. My mother wouldn't look at him. She just stared at the steam rising from her cup of tea as though it could fog away the truth. I caught fragments, decomposition, personal effects, possible age of remains, each phrase colder than the last. I thought of my father's hands planting tulips there years ago, his whistle soft against the morning air. My mother's eyes finally met mine when the detective said, "This didn't happen recently." Her lips parted, trembling, and in the smallest voice she whispered, "No, it never stopped happening." The morning came slow and cruel. I hadn't slept. Every sound, the hum of generators, the scrape of boots, the low murmur of radios, felt like the house itself was confessing. Reporters had gathered beyond the fence, their whispers filling the air with speculation. My mother refused to leave her chair by the window, watching the backyard like a widow at a grave. When I asked her again what she was hiding, she only said, "I was trying to protect you." But her voice carried the exhaustion of a lie too long worn. The detective returned with photographs, blurry, soil-streaked evidence sealed in plastic. One image made her gasp and cover her mouth. I leaned closer and saw a shape wrapped in fabric, small, unmistakably human. My breath caught, and for the first time she started to cry. Not softly, but like a woman mourning something that had been dead far longer than either of us knew. That night, silence wrapped the house like fog. My mother hadn't spoken in hours. She sat near the fire, her face lit in pulses of orange and shadow, lips moving without sound. I wandered the hallways, every creak of the floorboards sounding like a heartbeat buried beneath us. I found myself standing before the back door again, the glass reflecting both my face and the faint outline of the oak outside. There were no sirens now, no flashlights, just the wind brushing through empty branches. The hole had been covered temporarily, but the earth looked restless, uneven, like something beneath it still wanted out. Behind me, my mother's voice came at last, quiet and broken. I told him to stop. I begged him. My throat tightened. I turned to face her, but she was still staring at the fire as if seeing someone I could not. Sleep would not come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the hole, the way the dirt seemed to breathe, the faint shimmer of that rotted fabric. By dawn, the police had gone, leaving silence and yellow tape like scars across the yard. My mother hadn't left her chair. The air inside felt heavier now, as though the walls knew more than we did. I went down to the cellar for wine, but stopped halfway down the stairs. The air was cold, metallic, and beneath it came a faint sound. Dripping water, then something else. A thud, rhythmic, deliberate. My flashlight beam caught a section of wall darker than the rest, slightly recessed, dust brushing away beneath my fingers, to reveal a small metal latch. When it opened, the smell that escaped wasn't dampness. It was memory. The latch opened easier than it should have. Inside were 3 small journals bound in cracked leather, their pages yellowed and brittle. My father's handwriting filled them. Neat, deliberate, the same measured hand that once taught me to write my name. The first entries were innocent. Notes about gardening, weather, my mother's cooking. Then came the ship. Phrases like, "The girl once stopped crying," and "Eleanor hears them at night." My stomach twisted. I turned the pages faster, past smudged ink and water stains, until a final entry froze me cold. "I can't bury another secret. The earth is full." I dropped the journal, heart pounding so loud I almost didn't hear the footsteps above me. When I came upstairs, my mother was waiting in the kitchen, her robe buttoned to the throat. She didn't ask what I'd found. She just said, "You shouldn't have gone down there." Her voice was brittle, like glass about to fracture. I placed the journals on the table between us. Her hand hovered over them but didn't touch. "They were his," she whispered, almost tenderly, as if saying his name would summon him. I asked her what he'd done, what she'd hidden, but she only stared at the window where police tape fluttered in the wind. "He said the ground forgave him," she murmured, "but I never could." Then she stood and walked away, leaving the journals open, the words bleeding into the morning light. The detective returned before noon. He said they'd found artifacts buried deeper than the initial grave. Small bones, pieces of cloth, something metallic. I saw the weight in his eyes when he asked about my father. My mother stayed silent, staring at the floor. I told him about the journals, about the words that didn't sound like my father's, but like someone confessing through another man's hand. He asked to see them, flipping through with gloved fingers. Then he stopped, brow furrowing at a drawing. A young girl's face, crudely sketched in pencil, beneath it the words, "She sings when it rains." My mother's breath hitched. She whispered, "Don't let her find her voice again." That evening, rain began to fall, the first since I'd returned home. I sat alone in the cellar, staring at the journals, the words twisting in my mind. Somewhere upstairs, my mother hummed a tune, faint and broken, a melody that didn't sound like hers. I thought of the line, "She sings when it rains." The sound grew clearer, almost childlike now. My heart began to race. I called out to her, but she didn't answer. When I climbed the stairs, the house was dark except for a single candle on the windowsill. My mother stood by the back door, looking out at the oak, humming softly. When she turned, her eyes were wet, her voice barely a whisper. "She's under there still, Clara. She never stopped singing." Morning came gray and soundless, heavy with the scent of wet earth. My mother hadn't spoken since the night before, only watched the rain through the window as if listening for something beneath it. Detective Cole returned with new findings. Multiple remains, not just one, and all buried at different depths. His words seemed to echo down a tunnel of disbelief. I looked at my mother and saw her shoulders shake, not from cold, but from something unraveling deep inside. When he asked again if she knew anything, she finally spoke, her voice low and trembling. "It was supposed to stop with her," she said. I didn't understand. Cole leaned forward. With who? Mrs. Whitmore. She lifted her eyes to his, pale and distant. The first one, she whispered. The one he brought home. My mother spoke slowly, as though afraid of the words themselves. She said the girl's name was Lily, someone my father had met when he volunteered at the church. She was 16, quiet, always singing. One night she came home with him, bruised, barefoot, trembling. My mother had tried to send her away, but my father insisted she stay until she got better. Weeks passed. The girl stopped singing. Then one night she disappeared. He said she'd gone home. My mother said she never saw her leave. Her voice broke as she said it. I felt my stomach twist, the air closing in. When I asked why she hadn't told anyone, her answer was small and terrible, because he said you'd be next. Detective Cole didn't move for a long time after she finished speaking. The rain outside had turned to a steady hiss against the windows. When he finally stood, he said quietly that the remains would be sent for testing, but his voice was hollow, stripped of authority. My mother kept whispering the same phrase. He made me help him. He made me bury her. I wanted to scream, to deny it, but the words hung in the air like smoke. Cole turned to me, eyes soft but steady. You understand, Clara. This means your father. I cut him off. My father's dead. My mother's gaze shifted to me then, her lips trembling. No, darling, she said, her voice cracking. He's still here. That night, I found my mother in the cellar. The air was freezing, her candle barely alive in the dark. She was kneeling beside the open recess where I'd found the journals, whispering something I couldn't hear. When I stepped closer, she pressed her hand against the wall and said softly, "He built this to hide them." Her eyes reflected the candle flame, glassy and lost. I asked who else was them, but she only smiled faintly, like someone listening to an old song. Then she turned toward me, her expression suddenly lucid. I killed him, she said. I thought I did, but sometimes, Clara, when it rains, I still hear him digging. The candle guttered out then, plunging us into cold, perfect darkness. By dawn, the cellar door stood open, and my mother was gone. The police found her near the oak tree, kneeling in the mud, her robe soaked through. She'd been digging with her bare hands, whispering his name. When I ran to her, she looked up at me through the rain, mud streaking her cheeks like war paint. I thought I could keep you safe, she said, voice barely audible over the storm, but I only kept the truth alive. I fell beside her, clutching her cold hands, as sirens screamed again in the distance. She leaned close, lips trembling, and whispered, "He made me promise, if anyone dug here again, we'd both pay." Lightning flashed, illuminating the torn earth and the outline of another, smaller grave. The storm ended by morning, but the world outside still felt broken. The police had cordoned off the backyard again. Every step through the mud left new ghosts behind. I sat in the kitchen, numb, until Detective Cole came in carrying an evidence folder sealed in plastic. He placed it on the table, his voice low. We found something else in the second grave. Inside was a small photograph. Grainy, faded, but clear enough to steal my breath. A girl, maybe 15, stood barefoot in a sundress, her face turned slightly toward the camera. There was a bruise along her jaw, a cut on her wrist. But what froze me wasn't the injuries. It was the background. The oak tree. Our house. My father's shadow falling across her shoulder. I showed the photo to my mother, expecting shock, denial, something. But she only closed her eyes and said, "He painted her." I didn't understand until she led me upstairs, to the room my father used to call his studio. Dust lay thick on the floor, canvases covered with sheets that smelled of turpentine and rain. My mother's hands shook as she uncovered them one by one. Portraits of women, young, bruised, half-smiling, some unfinished, others torn. Then, at the back, the final canvas. The girl from the photograph, sitting beneath the oak tree, eyes wide with fear. My mother's voice cracked as she whispered, "He said they were muses, but they never left." Detective Cole returned with news, dental records, DNA, timelines that blurred the line between truth and myth. He said one of the remains didn't match the girl's age. Another belonged to a child. My mother wept openly now, no longer hiding behind silence. She told me about the nights she'd hear digging, how he'd tell her it was for new flower beds. When the girl's parents came asking, he said she'd run away. And my mother had believed him, or at least she'd wanted to. Cole's voice softened as he said they'd found a necklace among the remains, a small silver charm in the shape of a lark. I remembered it then. The same charm I'd found years ago, tucked inside one of my father's drawers. That night, I couldn't stay in the house. I walked the perimeter of the yard, the soil slick under my boots. The oak towered above, its roots glistening in the damp moonlight. I thought of the girl, Lily, her face trapped in paint and memory. I wondered how many others my father had immortalized only to erase. I dropped to my knees before the tree, hands pressing into the mud. "I didn't know," I whispered. Though I wasn't sure who I was saying it to, the wind moved through the branches, and for just a moment, I thought I heard humming. Faint, childlike, a song carried on the night air, rising from the ground itself. The next morning I woke to music. Not the radio, not the hum of pipes, singing. Faint, sweet, impossibly familiar. My mother was gone again, her bed empty. I followed the sound through the house, past the stairs, down into the cellar. The door to the recess stood open. The air was colder than ever, thick with the smell of damp earth and something metallic. The humming grew louder as I stepped closer, until I realized it wasn't coming from below, but above. Through the cracks in the ceiling, from the yard, I ran outside. My mother was there, standing beneath the oak, holding something small and white in her hands. "She was only trying to go home," she said softly. Then she opened her palms, and the wind carried away the last of the girl's bones like ashes. The days blurred after the discovery. Reporters lined the road, their cameras flashing like lightning each time the door opened. The house no longer felt like a home. It pulsed with memory, a living grave. Detective Cole came daily, his face wearing the erosion of sleepless nights. He told us the truth was worse than they feared. At least 3 victims, all young girls, all connected to my father's years as a counselor at a church program long ago. My mother barely reacted. She only whispered, "I knew the ground would speak one day." When I asked her why she never left him, she looked at me as if I'd asked why she never stopped breathing. "He was my sin," she said, "and you were my penance." That night, I dreamed of my father digging beneath the oak. His back was bent, his breath heavy, the sound of the shovel dull against the soil. I wanted to scream at him to stop, but my voice wouldn't come. When he turned, his face was nothing but shadow, and the hole kept getting deeper, swallowing the moonlight whole. I woke, gasping, the echo of shovels still in my ears. My mother sat at the edge of my bed, her hand cold against my wrist. "He used to dream the same thing," she said softly. "After each one, he'd plant a new flower." I realized then that every tulip in that garden marked a grave she never dared to name. Detective Cole called again the next morning. He said one of the victims had been identified, a missing girl named Lily Harper, reported in 1989. Her mother had come forward after seeing the news. I felt sick hearing her name spoken aloud, as if the earth itself recoiled from the sound. Cole's eyes softened when he said the mother wanted to visit, to see where her daughter had been found. My mother refused, saying, "Let her remember her child alive." But something inside me broke open. I told him yes. Maybe the living needed to meet the dead halfway. When Lily's mother came, the sky was clear for the first time in weeks. She was small, quiet, her eyes the color of smoke. We stood together by the oak, where the police had covered the ground again. The soil still uneven. She knelt there, pressing her palm to the earth as though she could feel her daughter's heartbeat beneath it. "She loved to sing," the woman said softly. "He told us she had a gift." I had no words. My mother watched from the porch, her face pale as porcelain. When the woman turned to leave, she touched my hand and said, "Sometimes love hides monsters." I couldn't look her in the eyes after that. That night, I heard the humming again. Soft at first, then rising. A lullaby carried through the cracks in the floor. I followed it to the cellar door. My mother was there, kneeling on the steps, her face wet with tears. "It's her," she whispered. "She's finally singing for herself." The air shimmered, vibrating with a sound too human to be wind. My heart pounded as I knelt beside her. The humming turned into something else. A cry, faint but filled with rage, echoing through the walls. My mother clutched my arm. "It's what he feared," she said. "The ground remembers." Then, with a shaking breath, she smiled. "Now she'll never stop." "Now a tea, and now she'll soar. A Dorsey." I couldn't escape the sound anymore. The low hum that drifted through the house, vibrating in the pipes, whispering through the walls. Detective Cole said the case was closed for now, but nothing felt finished. My mother had stopped sleeping altogether. She sat awake each night by the fire, muttering fragments of prayers and names. One evening, when the wind began to rise, she handed me the rusted shovel from the shed. Her hands were shaking, her eyes hollow but certain. "He left one more thing down there," she said. "Not hers. His." I didn't want to believe her, but part of me, some poisoned part, needed to know if the earth would finally be done with us. The first dig was easy. The earth had already learned to give way. My hands ached, mud caked beneath my nails, the smell of rot and rain filling my lungs. My mother watched in silence, her face blank, like she was somewhere far from the present. The shovel struck something hard. A box, wooden, sealed tight with rusted clasps. My heart hammered as I pulled it free. My mother stepped closer, her breath trembling. "He said he wrote it all down," she whispered. Inside the box was a smaller, wrapped parcel. My father's last journal, the cover blackened with age. My fingers hesitated before opening it. The first line was simple. "For my daughter, when she's ready to know." I read until my hands went numb. My father's words were careful, almost tender in their madness. He wrote about how it began, helping lost girls, feeding them, sheltering them. Then how their songs followed him even after they left, until one night he couldn't bear the silence. He said he preserved them, painted them to keep their voices eternal. My mother had tried to stop him. The night she discovered the truth, she struck him with the same shovel I now held. But he hadn't died right away. He'd begged her to bury him, with the rest, to keep his sins hidden. She'd done it, believing it was the only way to protect me. By the time I finished reading, the words blurred through tears. My mother sat beside me, whispering, "I tried to end the curse, but karma doesn't forget." The journal ended with one final plea. "Whoever finds this, don't dig for me. Let the ground hold what it took." My mother stared at the words, her lips moving silently. Then she looked at me and said, "You have to finish what I couldn't." Her meaning settled in the silence that followed. She wanted me to exhume him, to bring him into the light, to end what she had hidden. I told her we could let the police handle it, but she only shook her head. "The police can't bury guilt," she said softly. "Only we can." So we went out again, beneath the rising storm, the lantern swinging between us. The wind howled through the branches, as if urging us to stop. We didn't. We found him where she said he'd be, deeper than the others, beneath roots thick as rope. The first glimpse was of a coat button, then a skull half buried in clay. The wind screamed through the oak's hollow trunk. My mother knelt, sobbing, whispering his name. I stood frozen, shovel in hand, unsure if I was digging a grave or opening a door to something darker. Then from beneath the soil a low hum began, like a dozen voices rising in unison, the dead singing their judgment. My mother looked up at me, her tears lost in the rain. "Now he can answer them," she said. When I reached for her, she smiled, a small broken smile, and let the storm take her. When dawn came, the storm was gone, leaving the earth slick and shining, the color of bruised metal. My mother was lying near the oak, her hands folded neatly over her chest, mud clinging to her robe like a shroud. Her face was peaceful, too peaceful, as though the storm had granted her the mercy she'd been chasing for years. The police found me kneeling beside her, the shovel beside my knees, the ground behind us unearthed and trembling. Detective Cole said nothing at first. He only placed his coat over her body, then helped me stand. I remember telling him, "It's finished," but it wasn't. The wind that brushed the leaves still carried that faint, unearthly hum. Justice had come, but forgiveness had not. They took my mother's body away that morning. I watched from the porch, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of smoke and rain. The police moved quietly, as though afraid to wake the dead. Detective Cole told me they'd confirmed everything. The remains, the confession, even the journal. My father's crimes, my mother's silence, all catalogued and boxed away. "You can leave this place now," he said, his voice kind. But I couldn't. Every plank, every nail in that house had absorbed too much of us to ever be clean again. I walked to the window where she used to sit and saw her reflection in the glass, smiling faintly, like she'd finally been heard. Days passed. The reporters left. The police tape fluttered away, but the silence remained, a hollow ache where voices used to live. I buried the journals in the same place I'd found them, sealing the past beneath the roots it had poisoned. The oak stood quiet now. No hum, no whisper. Only the steady breath of the wind. I wanted to believe it was over, that the dead had been heard and the living freed. But every evening when the light turned amber and the air grew still, I felt her presence beside my mother's voice, calm and certain. "Karma doesn't punish, Clara. It restores." One evening, I returned to the cellar. The air was cold, but no longer suffocating. I lit a single candle and set it where my mother used to sit. The walls no longer whispered, they listened. For the first time, I spoke aloud the names from my father's journal. Lily, Margaret, Anne, and with each one the air seemed to grow lighter. When I reached the last name, there was silence. And then, faintly, a sigh that sounded almost like release. I knew then that the house could rest, and so could she. I closed the recessed door, sealed it with brick and mortar, and left it to the earth. I left the house a week later. The oak stood tall behind me, its leaves whispering in the wind, not in sorrow, but in something close to peace. As I drove away, the morning light broke through the branches, scattering gold across the road ahead. I thought of my mother's hands, the sound of her voice, the weight of the shovel that had ended and begun everything. Some debts are paid in silence, others bloom in time. When I looked in the rearview mirror, the old house was barely visible through the fog, just a silhouette against the rising sun. But for a heartbeat, I could have sworn I saw her standing by the tree, smiling.